Okay. Okay. Well, that's sad. And then you mentioned your friend Rhonda Tiffany who needs a kidney transplant.
She's a cashier at Ingles. I went to school with her, and she told me that she was trying to get a kidney, so I thought we
So she's close to your age.
yeah.
To do it, or is that usually the way it works? No.
No, age doesn't matter.
Okay.
More so for the donor, age does, but for the recipient, it doesn't.
Well, that's good to hear. I don't know where I had heard before.
7-year-old man that got one.
Really, well, that's encouraging to hear, just in case for all of us. But yeah, I'd always assumed that they prioritize the youth. But
She's in her 50s.
yeah, that's still young to me. Yeah, it's still young. Well, thank you for that clarification. We're really sorry to hear about that. And then Miranda Lewis's grandmother, Carol Ayers.
Miranda was Jane's caretaker. Leroy had asked me to put this on.
Oh, I remember her. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they came to our Christmas party one. Yeah.
We sent them a bulletin.
Okay.
I
And
don't know the status. So.
does anyone know personally Amy Arp of Corinth? Her daughter died. Said she's asking for prayers.
It's been a while. I don't know. Who asked me to put that on there? I guess Leroy.
And then Senator Hicks' cousin needs prayers. Well, there's just so many. I'm sure if we really had time, we could sit down and make a whole bulletin full of those. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know if the coffee's ready. If you don't mind, I'm sorry. It might help me a little bit. I'm still not quite to 100%. Whatever I've had has been with me for nearly a month now. 3 weeks anyway. I guess it's still making. What do y'all think?
I can't hear.
I just put on right before y'all came. Excuse me for a moment.
Betty's your mother better. Betty M. Gray. Huh? That's Philip's mother. Yes. Yes, that's what I'm not sure. I think she is. Didn't she better? Your mother better? Your mother better?
She's having a procedure done over the weekend at home. They brought in a portable, what's it called? EKG. What do when you do a brainwave scan? What do they call that?
Oh, yeah. EEG.
EEG. They brought in a machine because she's been having some issues. Occasionally she'd faint or have a spell like migraine and fainting type spell. All this past week she hasn't had one, but they were scheduled to come. She did have one
At least 2.
while she was hooked up to the machine. That's good. Well, that means they can monitor it to try to figure out what's causing it. So, but otherwise she seems to be doing well. But it's a real aggravation and a concern. I know.
She able to get around?
Well, she mostly is a homebody now. She gets around the house. I mean, okay, I think she actually can walk better than Daddy a little bit. But he can walk around too. He does most of the housework, cooking. Furniture serves. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you asking about them. They doing about as well as to be expected for their age, I suppose. I don't mean to be cavalier about it, but we are thankful. And talking about ages, we'll be looking at some here how the ages of these patriarchs seem to be getting less and less with each generation. So I think we're down at chapter 48. Is that not right, to begin chapter 48? We're nearly finished. Probably we could take a moment and consider what we might want to do once we finish, the Lord willing, hopefully in a couple of weeks. Maybe today, but probably in a couple of weeks. It's possible to continue with the book of Exodus. It would make sense logically. It's the same narrative, you might say. It's talking about the same people because we're going to be left hanging with the children of Israel in Egypt. So in Exodus, we find out what eventually happens to them, as we know, and how they will eventually be able to leave and head back to Canaan. So that's a possibility. But if the class would prefer something else, or if you have a suggestion about something else that might be more needful at the moment, I'm open to any of those suggestions. So What say you? Anybody with any ideas that have been rolled over in your mind recently? Betty, you got any ideas? Like you wanted to say something? Continue. I suppose we could do that until we're interrupted for some reason, but it would make sense. It's the same author, Moses. And although Genesis and Exodus are two separate books, and even were in the Hebrew Bible, they are part of the same narrative. It's a continuum, one is of the other. In fact, you could say the entire first 5 books, the Pentateuch, would be that way. Although I have thought, if you cover Genesis and Exodus, you probably are getting most of the narrative. Now, you can supplement Exodus from some of the other books. For example, some of the things that are prescribed in Exodus, or the outline there, would be fleshed out a little bit more in detail in Numbers and in Leviticus. Of course, the book of Deuteronomy is also very valuable. It's sort of a recapitulation of all the things that have been done earlier in the wilderness wanderings. It's at the end of the wilderness wanderings, just prior to entering into Canaan. So that's also a possibility. But I would say at least Genesis, Exodus for textual studies. And then after that, if we needed to, we could move on to something maybe topical or even a New Testament book. All right. Well, let's go on and read this and see some of the richness of this narrative concerning the blessings that are given by Jacob. And these are formal blessings by Jacob, who had obviously a prophetic gift. That we must not forget. These are not just as I would do if I were older and about to die and had my my sons-in-law and my daughters and grandsons all around, and granddaughters. I might want to say some words of encouragement to them, but they would not be inspired predictions. I wouldn't have any insight into what may happen in their life or future. However, Jacob will. So this is very important. First of all, we're going to see the blessings of Joseph's children by Jacob. And then the next chapter is going to go over the entire set of heads of the clans, or of the different tribes. So chapter 48, verse 1, I'll be reading again from the ESV. After this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel, that's Jacob of course, summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me," and remember that, we read that episode earlier in Genesis. Verse 4, "Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. And now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are." So that's a beautiful statement, is it not? As it were, adopting his grandsons for his own. Beautiful, I think, the whole concept. "And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance." Now we're going to see this is not just a beautiful poetic statement, but it will have ramifications for the inheritance of the land of Israel. One named after him, but after his sons. So in that way, he partakes of the inheritance. Well, again, verse 6, "They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance." Verse 7, "As for me, when I came from Padan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath," that is, Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." Now remember that he's going to have the same affliction the rest of the family suffers. In my family, it's deafness, early deafness, I guess. But with that family, it was problems with eyesight, it appears, as they got older, which happens to all of us, really, to an extent. But when he got older, he had problems seeing as well as he used to. So he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face. And behold, God has let me see your offspring also." What was that song? Is it Don Williams I don't want to die till I'm too old to die young. Remember that song? Some of y'all remember, till I'm too old to die young. Let me see my children grow to see how they will be, or something, how they will become, what they will become. And I thought it's just a yearning of all of us. When you get older, those kinds of country songs mean something too. That was a good one, I thought. Some of his songs are thoughtful. Anyway, I'm thinking of that here. He didn't think he'd have the opportunity to see that, but now he could see his grandson. Verse 12, then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And now that's great respect, is it not? Let's see. Joseph bowed his face to the earth. Here he is second in command in Egypt. But for whom does he have respect? His father. And not just because he's his earthly father, that's true. But in view of the patriarchal position that he enjoyed, in God's plan of salvation, Israel or Jacob was a very important person, a very important link in the chain of personages who would be the author of the nation of Israel and bring about the ultimate salvation of all mankind through Jesus. So all of this points toward the Christian era, and we have to read it through Christian lenses. And we do. So there's reason to be greatly respectful. And Joseph took them both, 13, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys. And in them let my name be carried on, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now I don't know if he's planning to continue more, but it gets interrupted in this blessing. So we see what he's done. He's given the chief blessing to the younger, Ephraim. And that's not supposed to be. And when Joseph, verse 17, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. In other words, he's old and half blind and senile. We're always that way. We're kind of officious to our parents, aren't we? Because we think they don't know what they're doing. But he did. This was on purpose. And Joseph said to his father, not this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. That's the expected thing. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. So don't discount their ability to know something. They may be partly blind, but they're not stupid, right? And he had a real reason for this. He shall also become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, but you, Israel, will pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you, rather than to your brothers, one mountain slope that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. So I need to revise this statement I made a few weeks ago when I said that what they had as a possession in Canaan already was very little in terms of land that they dominated. They were mostly nomads there, sojourned in the land, and they bought certain pieces of ground for burial plots and things like that. But here we have an exception where he did use some physical force and he took some land, a token, you might say, of the land, part of the land. So what we have here then is the blessing on Ephraim. Now it does become the case that Ephraim waxes great or strong, you might say, his posterity. So that at one point, in fact, in a long period of their history, after the division of the kingdom, you have two sides of the division. Now, remind me, I want to just kind of do a little drilling. What parts of the kingdom? We have two sides. What are they known as? Right, the northern and the southern kingdom. Now, the southern kingdom was characterized by which tribe? Which was the predominant tribe? You have a little bit of Benjamin, a little bit of Simeon there. It's mostly Judah. So for all practical purposes, it's just the one tribe of Judah. Now, what do you have the 10 tribes to the north? Again, you have Simeon also, I think, part of Simeon in the southern kingdom. What do you have to the north? We have all the rest of the tribes. But what is the name that's often used to designate the northern kingdom? It's one of the tribes that's predominant. It's Ephraim. Take the book of Hosea, for example. And throughout the book, now Hosea was a prophet to the northern kingdom to warn them of their wickedness. And he will call them Ephraim. So this is the name. It's a pretty good synonym for the northern kingdom. Ephraim or Samaria, a predominant city there. Samaria would be the predominant city in that area. So Ephraim, just kind of important to remember this. This is from the blessing, and it will happen this way historically. Verse 1 of chapter 49. Any questions or comments on 48? Excuse me for just a moment so I can take of my medicinal coffee. Perhaps I didn't need that last scoop, but it's good. Verse 1 of chapter 49. Then Jacob called his sons and said, gather yourselves together that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. And let me pause and say this. You really could spend a lot of time on the blessings of Jacob or his sons. In other words, you could flesh out all the outline here. Each one is an outline sort of prediction. And you can go to the rest of history, the rest of biblical history, to see how the things that are predicted here would pan out, how they would be fulfilled. We're not really prepared to do that today. I'll be honest, to go through all of that history, and it would take tons of time to cover it as you should. But just keep these things in mind in future studies of the Old Testament. That in embryo form you have some of the history. It hasn't happened yet, but things that will happen. And characteristics of the descendants of each of these sons, characteristics that are described here briefly, will be manifested in the peoples that will come forth in history to come. So he says, assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. And I'm going to say this. We will probably talk a little bit more about Judah, the prediction about Judah, because it is absolutely significant. It is absolutely a core prediction for our understanding the rest of the Bible, not just the rest of the Old Testament, but all of Scripture. And I've used some of this material in the past. I don't know if you recall, but I have talked about what I call, this is my figure, the funnel of God's plan of redemption, or his revelation in particular. A funnel, as we all know what a funnel looks like, big at the top, small at the bottom. So it's a wide, general facet of history to begin with, and then it continually narrows and narrows till it gets to be a small, narrowing finally upon the culminating personage, which would be Jesus of Nazareth, of Judah, of the tribe of Judah. So with that in mind, we go back and we'll look at Judah to see how, in fact, there are some predictions made that help us understand some things about the fulfillment of all the promises, the messianic promises. There would be a lot of messianic implications. In other words, implications about the Messiah who will come one day. Verse 2, here's the blessing. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength. Preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. So you ought to get all the benefits, right? Nope. Verse 4. You're my firstborn, but you're unstable as water. I've heard that expression a lot. It's a biblical idea, isn't it? I mean, you try to hold water in your hand, it just runs everywhere. It's kind of unstable. It's not very stable. You shall not have preeminence. And here's what you did. In other words, a particularly really bad decision in your lifetime, a really egregious mistake, is going to influence your entire posterity. The rest of the tribe will not have the preeminence that they might have had because you went to your father's bed. You remember that? We looked at it earlier. Whom did he take and had relations with? His concubines, yeah. Concubines of his father. And that was one of those things, and it was terrible. It was wrong. It was immoral. You went to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. He went up to my couch. That's a pretty strong thing. You just wonder what was the facial expression when all of them are gathered around and they're hearing their father's about to die pronounce these final blessings. Well, he asked for it because of his stupid choice. Verse 5. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Now they also made some choices. Remember, we looked at that. We'll go back and review that second. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So in other words, you're not going to be highly blessed either. What did they do? Remember? How did Simeon and Levi get together and conspire to commit violence? Remember the story?
Wasn't it revenge against the sister?
Yeah, for their sister. Dinah was taken and humiliated by Shechem, right? Shechem, the son. Anyway, the son of Shechem, and they killed them. They killed all the men. Remember, they deceived them. They said, "We'll let you have our sister in marriage, but first you got to agree to be circumcised. Can't have her with any heathen types like you, uncircumcised." So they agreed, and while they were in the hours of their surgery, shortly thereafter, they were incapacitated. So these young men went and killed them. Or these men went and killed them all. Revenge. And you don't hear a whole lot said in a negative kind of way in the narrative. It just tells us what they did. But now there's a commentary on that, and their father tells them, "You're bloody men. You're angry men. So you don't deserve it either." The special blessing. Now verse 8. This is going to be different. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. This is going to be a very important tribe. The most important in my opinion. You could argue Levi is, although Levi himself has a bad reputation for being a killer, still his sons will become, a particular facet of his sons will become the priests. But Judah is going to be special. Your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? Now, let's just stop there and notice verse 9. Verses 8 and 9 basically talk about the courageousness of Judah as a man. And this would be characteristic of his children too. But so he's courageous. He's like a lion, bold as a lion. That's a noble animal to be compared to. So this is obviously a blessing that's favorable. Now, verse 10 is to me one of the most important passages in all of the Old Testament, where he says in prediction, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. Let's just pause. Now, scepter, ruler's staff, parallelism, basically just two different sides of the same. He's just talking about what a scepter is. It is a ruler's staff. So it's the staff, which is a symbol of kingly authority, royal authority. What he's saying is, it will not depart from Judah, which means Judah will have it, right? Judah will have royal authority. The tribe of Judah will be especially a royal tribe in that sense. And how long will Judah have this blessing upon it? The tribe of Judah. Throughout all of Old Testament history, in fact, we will see up until a certain event occurs, and this is sort of enigmatic. It's difficult to translate out of the Hebrew. But I think we can understand it in view of all of Scripture. So let's just look at it here. And until tribute comes to him, the ESV says. Now, the King James Version has a proper name until Shiloh comes. Now, Shiloh, again, that's a strange statement to make. We don't know of anyone else in the Bible ever called by a proper name. Shiloh, here comes Shiloh, or there was Shiloh. So we have to ask, what does it mean? Well, there have been some attempts at translating this in different ways. And again, I say it's somewhat of a translational question. It can mean the idea of he to whom it belongs comes. So that would seem to be in the context of talking about that scepter or that ruler's staff. You're going to continue to maintain your royal authority until he to whom it belongs shall come. And that would definitely be a messianic prophecy. I believe that it is. And one other minor type of translation of this, or minor commentary or explanation, is that Shiloh is the proper name for the place called Shiloh, where later on Saul would have, of course, his rule. Where you'd have the tabernacle after the children of Israel entered into the land of Canaan. Before Jerusalem was conquered from the Jebusites, and before Jerusalem became the center of worship, Shiloh was a very important center of worship in earliest days of the Israelite conquest. So some thought it meant that, but it doesn't fit the context here to think it has anything to do with the place, the village or town called Shiloh. So most likely it should be translated something like, he to whom it belongs comes. But in hallowed usage of all the many centuries of the King James Bible being in our midst as English-speaking Christians, Shiloh has come to designate for us, in our minds, a proper name. It has become the conceptual equivalent of Jesus, or the Messiah. So it's a messianic prediction. So the scepter will not depart from Judah. He's going to have kingly rule, royal rule, until he comes to whom it belongs. Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Again, reinforcing the idea this is a messianic prediction, because that is the case even today. Who has all authority in heaven and on earth to rule the nations in the sense of the ultimate spiritual side of mankind? What really makes us are humans, and that's Jesus. Jesus Christ, his rule is that which by right is over every human today, although most do not recognize his rule. But de jure, we might say, if not de facto, he rules over mankind today. Verse 11, binding his foal to the vine. These are just some poetic predictions of the blessings that will come to him. And his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. So that's the prediction about Judah. Again, as I said, you could spend a lot of time on this, and I have used this before as the basis for tracing out other prophecies. You're looking for something. In other words, someone special is going to come. Judah is going to retain her sovereignty, or semi-sovereignty anyway. She's going to retain her royal authority, her ability to be a ruler. And she, of course, will be the entire southern kingdom, God's blessed kingdom, for after the divided kingdom here for a long time. Until this personage comes. We're convinced it is a personage in mind, a person. Shiloh, we could say, or he to whom it belongs. After that, you could say Judah would lose her sovereignty. What's important about this, if you trace out the history, although there were some dark days, Judah was enslaved, taken off into captivity, we would say, enslaved by the Babylonians. And for 70 years, Judah languished. Well, I say languished. They really did. For 70 years, they were in Babylon, but Jewish people being what they are, they came out of Babylon really well off. Many of them didn't leave. They're there to this, well, I don't know if they're there now in Iraq. They probably have a hard time, but they were there for many centuries. There's a big enclave of Jews in Babylon, Iraq. So they're going to stay there, and they will do well, but they're not in their homeland where they want to be until the 70-year period is up. Then they will be allowed to return. Why were they taken into captivity? Briefly, what's the answer? What did they do wrong? Idolatry. They did other things wrong too, but the idolatry was the principal sin, and it led to the immorality that was part of the culture too, just as it is today. Exactly the same. So anyway, Judah would come back, but Judah never ceased being Judah and would still be in control of that territory once Judah came back to the homeland. Until, well, two things would happen. In AD 70, Titus Vespasian and the Roman army would come against the Jews for their rebellion. They were constantly hard to govern and wipe them out, basically. Almost completely destroyed Judah in AD 70. Excuse me. Hold that thought for a moment. I apologize. Maybe this spring we'll be back to normal. I believe it was 120 AD. You had the final rebellion of the Jews that remained after AD 70. Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was destroyed in AD 70. And then you had the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And the Roman army came in and did away with the Jewish nation altogether. Now, they were dispersed among the peoples, as today they are, but no longer retain their sovereignty. So I think you could say AD 70 is a pretty good cutoff point to say Judah lost her scepter in AD 70. Why does that matter? Because he's talking about they're holding on to a scepter for a period of time, a long one. But something would happen before they would cease to have that scepter. What would happen? Someone's coming. Who's coming?
And then he established a kingdom not made with hands. So maybe that's
Who?
Christ.
Okay, Christ is coming. So we've jumped ahead. And he's saying here Shiloh is coming. And we would identify that, the King James term, Shiloh, with Christ. Right. So the point I'm making is it's a chronological point, and it's very important. Throughout the Old Testament, there's the prediction someone is coming. But you can step back after reading it and ask, but when? And there are time indicators when Judah still retains her scepter. She's going to lose it just about 30 or 40 years, about 40 years later, after Shiloh comes. But it's right on the verge of her ceasing to have her sovereignty. So that's the point we're making. So we know historically when Judah lost the scepter. And we know, therefore, the Messiah would have to come at that time. And this should be important if they would just see it in their own Bibles. For Jews today, to recognize that the Messiah is not yet to come. The Messiah has already come. Now, Loretta mentioned something, too, that also coincides with that, a prediction that would be made later in the book of Daniel, Daniel 2 and verse 44, where Daniel is telling King Nebuchadnezzar how to interpret his weird dream he had of this big image out on the plain. And he said it's made of gold, brass and silver and iron. You're the head of gold and so on. He names down how these are kingdoms. The different metals symbolize kingdoms, world empires. The first and the greatest was the Babylonian Empire, the one that was in existence at the moment. Then he goes on to talk about the empire of iron, and it will also be partly mixed with what? Clay. What does that symbolize? Iron and clay mixed together. What does that symbolize in terms of a kingdom?
Strength and weakness mixed together.
Yeah, well, it has strength. Iron is strong. At the same time, if you mix it with clay, it doesn't have cohesiveness. In other words, it won't be a kingdom like other kingdoms where it's homogeneous. It will be a kingdom of diversity and equity and inclusion. Well, it'd be a kingdom of diversity. So you would have people who would pay tribute to the Romans, and this refers in context to the Romans. And it was exactly a perfect description of the Roman Empire. The Romans allowed most people to retain most of their sovereignty, unlike in the United States, where the states are continually losing sovereignty. Every year there's more and more of an erosion. After 1866, 1865 rather, we've continued to lose ground in that regard. Unlike that, there were many states who were semi-independent. Some a little bit more into the boot than others. The Judeans had trouble. The Romans had trouble with the Judeans because they wouldn't recognize their right to rule. They were constantly giving them difficulties, and they were constantly being persecuted by the Romans. And eventually, as I said, in AD 70, they had enough. They destroyed the whole temple. Other nations, however, went along pretty well with the whole setup. They derive benefits. We pay tribute to Rome, and Rome in turn protects us from other enemies. And these barbarians that would come are Scythians, Russians, you might say, or Ukrainians, coming up from north of the Black Sea. So, we don't worry about those people out of Georgia and Armenia because we are protected by the Romans. Yes, it was a nation, it was an empire, rather, that was composed of the strength of iron, but the lack of cohesiveness you would have if you tried to mix iron and clay together. In the days of these kings, the prediction was Daniel 2:44, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Now, that would go along with the idea that the king would come to whom it belonged. One who would possess the scepter or the rod of rule, the staff of rule, ruling staff. And again, that all coincides with, there's just a lot that could be said about these verses here that all coincides with these other predictions about the time element when the Messiah would come. Again, our Messiah, the world's Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, has already come long ago, 2,000 years ago. Any questions or comments about that before we go on to Zebulun and the prediction about his descendants? Verse 13. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea, and he shall be a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. That's up in roughly the area of, I guess, around the Golan Heights, or actually more over toward the Mediterranean. It'd be right close to Lebanon. There's conflicts going on even there right now, with Hezbollah dumping missiles into Israel from time to time because they don't like Israel down in the south in Gaza, going after Hamas in Gaza. So Zebulun is in that area roughly. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. So that's right there. Sidon would be in ancient Phoenicia, which today is roughly coincides, not exactly, but very similar to the place where we have Lebanon. Issachar is a strong donkey. Now, if I were to be pronouncing blessings on some of my brothers and sisters, that metaphor might suggest itself also to my mind. I thought this. Anyway, Issachar is a strong donkey crouching between the sheepfolds. So you can imagine that powerful donkey. Donkeys are strong. If we want to stop and think about it. I mean, they say they're some of the best predator warding off type animals you can put in your pasture. I've seen videos. I know you have too. It's all out there everywhere today. We see this stuff of donkeys killing even hyenas in Africa. And they're pretty fierce animals, but a donkey killing a hyena. They kill dogs. They don't like canines. And they kill them. So donkeys are strong. That's why they put them in their pasture to protect them from predators off. And a donkey can hurt you too if you're not careful. Anyway, it's just crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. I'm not sure of all the prediction there. We'll have to go back. I'll honestly have to look into the prediction. Maybe someone else could fill us in on that. He became a servant at forced labor, Issachar. Now, no, of course, all of those kinds of things would be fulfilled eventually when the Assyrians would take over the northern kingdom and take all those 10 tribes away and obliterate them as tribal entities. Dan also to the north shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backwards. I'll wait for your salvation, O Lord. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph is a fruitful bough. Now, who's Joseph? We've already seen that earlier. Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Those 2 tribes are the Joseph tribe. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile. By the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings from heaven above. Blessings of the deep that crouches beneath. Blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Benjamin the son was the youngest, remember? And precious therefore to the father and to Joseph, who was his brother, actual brother. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. Actually, that would characterize his descendants. They are a very cruel people. There are going to be some times when, in fact, Benjamin will go to war with their own tribesmen, fellow kinsmen, or their kinsmen. Why? Well, over things like the homosexual incident where they end up killing this prophet's concubine. They tried one of their sodomite type of things. They were acting like sodomites, and they tried this sort of homosexual preying on people, and they did accept the consolation prize. They were not quite as far gone as Sodom. Sodom wouldn't accept the consolation prize of Lot's daughters. to satisfy their cruel lust. But these men did satisfy their lust with the concubine. They killed her and cut her off. Actually, they killed her, and then the prophet chopped her up and sent pieces to all the rest of Israel, and it so outraged them. There was a war with Benjamin. Benjamin's going to have some trouble later on. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. So now, that's the end of the blessings. And you could spend, I guess, a lot of years studying the details. And some have. I think people like Brother Rex Turner Sr. in his lifetime had spent many hours looking into the depths of these prophecies. So we will return to them from time to time, even in our New Testament studies about the coming of the Messiah and the predictions made about the Messiah. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, verse 28. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with a blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Well, is that bad? What does that mean? What does that expression mean? We've seen it a few times already. So he had confidence he would be with his people, those who had already gone on in death, obviously. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephraim the Hittite. Well, that's not in Egypt. That's way back in Canaan. In the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, again in Canaan, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with a field from Ephraim the Hittite to possess as a burying place. Then there they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. Of course, the next verse gives the natural reaction of a child. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. We're going to see too, he also tells the physicians there, now this is in Egypt, and they knew how to do this, to embalm him. And there's a lot that could be said about what we have understood from the embalming techniques. I've got, in fact, a note here in this archaeological study Bible that they practiced this, especially in the Middle Kingdom, from about 2040 to 1640 BC. Even a little bit later at this, well, in this time, this would be about that time. They learned how that it became much more complex and detailed, it says, about how they embalmed people. They would, I don't know if I want to read this. Well, let's just say they removed the internal organs and placed them in jars. Then the body was treated with natron. I'm not familiar with that, but it's a dehydrating sodium carbonate. Rosin and spices were also used on the skin. The corpse was wrapped in numerous layers of linen and placed into a wooden coffin. So, by the time of the New Kingdom, which is 1550 to 1070 BC, the process had become even more advanced. So, in other words, they knew how to do it, and they embalmed his body, mummified his body. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. It's a long time to have mourning. And even the Egyptians wept for him. Why would they weep for him? What is his status in Egypt? He's the father of Joseph, who's second in command. So, yes, they did. It's like in North Korea. It's not like that. I wouldn't compare the Egyptians to them. When our dear leader dies and the next dear leader comes along, they have to weep forever and ever, basically. If you don't weep, you're executed right there on the spot. If they don't think that you're as sad as you should be, you're executed. That's just the way it is under communism. That's what communism does to its logical extension. All right, that's as far as we need to go today. Here we are, 10 minutes till. We need to give ourselves a little time. I need to give myself a little time to prepare for the next hour. Any questions or comments before we try to finish up maybe next week with chapter 50? And we might even start into Exodus, but we'll end up with the last part of Genesis. Questions or comments about any of this? What strikes you overall as most important in our lesson today?
Blessings with the prophecies kind of mentioned.
Well, yes, that's what we spent most of our time on. And they are important. Of all the prophecies, I would say the one about Judah was most important. Because, see, not very much was really understood at the moment that prophecy was uttered about he to whom it belongs will come, the scepter not departing from Judah. They only vaguely had an idea, well, that's good. Judah's going to be a sovereign tribe for a long time, or for a period of time anyway. We know it will be a long time, relatively speaking. But what we know is how that was fulfilled, because who came of the tribe of Judah? Well, David did earlier, remember, the king of Israel. And then later on, one of his descendants would be Jesus of Nazareth. And that's what all of the Bible is about. And that was foreseen even then. The one who inspired Jacob to give these prophecies, the Holy Spirit, was of the omniscient Godhead and could foresee the entire future of mankind. Every detail, and knew every in and out of how this would be fulfilled. But he only chose to give some very generic kinds of references to blessings that would come. And as the Bible is developed, as the history unfolds, we're given more and more glimpses of what it would be like to be under the Messiah. Till we come to the New Testament and we see that those predictions could only be fulfilled in Jesus from Nazareth. All right, well, I could ring the bell, but it won't do any good because they won't hear me out there. They might can see me, Paul.